Sarah Thompson was doing her usual morning rounds on her Nebraska farm when something caught her eye. There, in the misty dawn light, was a sight she'd never seen before in her 30 years of farming. A bobcat dragging a heavy bag across her field. Most people would have grabbed their rifle, but something about the way the wild cat moved made Sarah pause. Instead of running away, the bobcat seemed almost desperate for her attention. Following at a safe distance, Sarah discovered something that would change her life forever. What she found in that bag would not only melt her heart, but transform her quiet farm into a sanctuary of hope. But what could make one of nature's most solitary predators reach out to a human for help? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Sarah stepped back into her farmhouse kitchen. Her boots left faint, dusty prints on the worn linoleum as she made her way to the coffee maker. Her mind still fixed on the strange sight she'd witnessed. The ancient machine sputtered to life, filling the quiet house with its familiar gurgling sound. While waiting for her coffee, Sarah's eyes drifted to the photograph hanging above the kitchen table. Her wedding day, 15 years ago. Tom's smile beamed back at her, his arms wrapped proudly around her waist as they stood in front of this very farmhouse. He'd inherited the place from his father, and together they'd planned to make it thrive. The frame held more than just a moment. It contained all their dreams, plans, and promises. "What would you make of this morning, Tom?" she whispered, touching the frame's edge. The glass needed dusting, but she never could bring herself to clean it. Sometimes those fingerprints were all that remained of days when she'd reach out to touch his face, seeking guidance or comfort. The coffee maker beeped, pulling her back to the present. Sarah poured herself a cup, adding a splash of cream from yesterday's milking. The dairy business wasn't what it used to be, but her small herd of 12 cows kept her going, just enough to make ends meet. Though lately, those ends seemed further apart. She settled into Tom's old chair, still his chair even after 5 years, and opened the farm ledger. The morning light caught the gold of her wedding band as she wrote the date and began noting the morning's tasks. Feed inventory, equipment maintenance, fence repairs in the north pasture, normal routine things that helped keep her mind occupied. But today, her pen hesitated over the blank page. How exactly does one record bobcat dragging mysterious bag across East Field in a farm ledger? The thought almost made her smile. Almost. Life hadn't been easy since Tom's heart attack. The bank had been understanding, but understanding didn't pay bills. She'd sold half the dairy herd, leased out the back 40 to the Hendersons, and taken up mending fences for neighboring farms to supplement her income. Every morning brought the same challenge, keeping this place, their dream, alive for one more day. Sarah took another sip of coffee and glanced at the window. The morning mist was burning off now, revealing the familiar patchwork of her land. The east field where she'd seen the bobcat lay golden in the strengthening sunlight, winter wheat starting to show promise. Beyond it, the old oak tree marked the boundary where their property met the state forest. Tom had proposed to her under that tree. The farm had changed since then. The red barn needed painting. The greenhouse Tom had started building remained unfinished, and the equipment was showing its age. But it was still home, still hers, still theirs, in a way that went deeper than mere ownership. Sarah closed the ledger and stood, her coffee finished. The day's work wouldn't wait, mysterious bobcats or not. She had cows to milk, eggs to collect, and that fence in the north pasture wouldn't fix itself. But as she pulled on her work gloves, her gaze kept drifting to the east field. Something about that bobcat's behavior nagged at her. In all her years on the farm, she'd never seen one act quite like that. The old Sarah, the one who lived in the wedding photograph, might have dismissed it as just another strange occurrence in a life filled with the unexpected rhythms of farming. But loss had taught her that sometimes the most important moments come disguised as interruptions to our carefully planned routines. She grabbed her jacket from its hook by the door. Tom's jacket, actually, worn soft with age and smelling faintly of hay and engine oil. The weight of it around her shoulders felt like an embrace, giving her the courage she needed to face whatever this day might bring. Sarah's boots crunched across the frost-covered grass as she made her way toward the east field. The trail camera she'd mounted on the fence post last spring blinked its red light steadily. A small comfort that at least she'd have proof of what she'd seen, assuming the bobcat had passed within its range. The morning air still held its bite, and Sarah pulled Tom's jacket tighter around her shoulders. She'd seen plenty of bobcats over the years, usually just fleeting glimpses as they slipped through the underbrush or crossed the fields at dusk. But this one had been different. Its movements had been deliberate, purposeful. She found the tracks easily enough, distinctive paw prints in the soft earth alongside a continuous groove where the bag had dragged. The trail led toward the old oak tree, and Sarah followed at a cautious distance, her heart thumping steadily against her ribs. Movement caught her eye, a flash of tawny fur in the shadows beneath the oak's sprawling branches. The bobcat was there, watching her. Sarah froze, barely breathing. The creature was larger than she'd expected, with tufted ears and intelligent eyes that seemed to study her just as carefully as she studied it. Then she heard it, a sound that made her breath catch in her throat, a tiny, mewling cry coming from the bag near the bobcat's feet. "Oh, Lord," Sarah whispered, understanding beginning to dawn. The bobcat didn't flee. Instead, it took a step back from the bag, then looked at Sarah with an intensity that seemed almost human. Another cry emerged from the bag, followed by several more. Sarah's mind raced. Everything she knew about wild animals told her to keep her distance, to call animal control or the wildlife service. But something in the bobcat's demeanor, in the way it had deliberately brought this bag to her farm, made her pause. Moving with exaggerated slowness, Sarah took a step forward. The bobcat watched but didn't move. Another step. Still no reaction. When she was about 15 feet away, she could finally see what the bag really was. An old canvas duffel, the kind farmers used to carry feed, its once green fabric now faded and torn. The cries were clearer now, a chorus of tiny voices that tugged at something deep in Sarah's heart. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone and snapped several pictures, documenting everything, the bobcat, the bag, the whole improbable scene. "I'm going to help," she said softly, not sure if she was talking to the bobcat or herself. "But you need to let me." As if in response, the bobcat took another step back, then sat on its haunches, tail wrapped neatly around its paws. Its eyes never left Sarah as she inched forward, each step a negotiation between caution and necessity. When she finally reached the bag, her hands shook as she carefully pulled back the frayed canvas. What she found inside made her gasp. Nestled together in a tight ball were 5 tiny kittens. Not bobcat kittens, but domestic cats, probably. No more than a few weeks old. Their eyes were barely open, their fur still fuzzy and undefined. They squirmed and mewed, pressing against each other for warmth. "You brought them to me," Sarah breathed, looking up at the bobcat in wonder. "But why?" The bobcat's only response was to blink slowly, a gesture that felt oddly like trust. Sarah quickly shrugged off Tom's jacket and gently wrapped it around. The bag of kittens. The morning was too cold for such tiny creatures to be outside. As she gathered them up, she glanced at the bobcat again, half expecting it to have vanished. But it remained, watching, waiting. "Well," Sarah said, cradling her precious burden, "I suppose we'd better get these little ones inside where it's warm." She took a step back toward the farmhouse, then paused. "You're welcome to come too if you want." The bobcat stood, stretching languorously. As Sarah made her way back across the field, she could sense it following at a distance, a silent escort to this most unusual procession. The farmhouse kitchen felt different now, filled with the soft mewling of 5 tiny lives. Sarah had placed the kittens in a shallow cardboard box, lined with old towels, setting it near the radiator for warmth. Through the window, she could see the bobcat still sitting in the yard, its attention fixed on the house. "What am I supposed to do with you?" she murmured, gently stroking one of the kittens with her finger. Their eyes weren't fully open yet, and their ears were still flat against their heads. She guessed they couldn't be more than 10 days old. Sarah crossed to the bookshelf in the living room, where Tom's old veterinary manual sat gathering dust. He'd bought it years ago when they'd first started the dairy operation, determined to handle as much of their veterinary care as possible to save money. She teased him then about being a wannabe vet, but now she was grateful for his practical foresight. The book's spine cracked as she opened it, releasing the faint smell of old paper and memories. She found the section on kitten care and began reading, her farmer's calloused finger tracing each line. Newborn kittens require feeding every 2 to 3 hours, cannot regulate their own body temperature, must be kept warm. The task ahead seemed overwhelming. She had a farm to run, bills to pay, and now this. The sensible thing would be to call animal control, let them handle it. But as she looked at the tiny creatures in their makeshift nest, something inside her rebelled against the idea. She remembered how Tom had always said that opportunities often came disguised as obligations. He'd believed that every challenge was really a chance to do something meaningful if you looked at it the right way. Sarah pulled out her phone and started searching for information about caring for orphaned kittens. The screen filled with supplies she'd need. Kitten formula, feeding bottles, heating pads, supplements. It wouldn't be cheap, and the feed store was an hour's drive away. The cows would need milking soon. The fence still needed fixing. A dozen other tasks demanded her attention, but as she watched one of the kittens yawn, tiny pink mouth stretching wide, she knew she'd already made her decision. She found an old hot water bottle in the bathroom cabinet and filled it, wrapping it in a towel before tucking it into the box with the kittens. Then she pulled out her notebook, the one where she kept feed schedules and breeding records, and started a new page, kitten care schedule. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, struggling to keep her farm afloat, and instead of focusing on that, she was taking on 5 more mouths to feed. Not to mention the bobcat, still maintaining its patient vigil outside. Sarah went to the window and looked out at the wild creature. "I suppose you knew what you were doing, bringing them here," she said softly. The bobcat's ears twitched at the sound of her voice. She thought about the trail camera footage she still needed to check, the calls she'd need to make, the supplies she'd need to buy. It was crazy, really. She could barely take care of herself and the farm, let alone a litter of orphaned kittens. But then she remembered something else Tom used to say. Sometimes the craziest choices turn out to be the most important ones we ever make. Sarah reached for her car keys, then paused to write a quick list. Kitten formula, bottles, heating, pad, eyedropper, soft blankets. She'd have to dip into her fence repair savings, but somehow that didn't seem as important anymore. As she headed for the door, she glanced back at the box of kittens, then out at the bobcat. "I'll be back soon," she said to both of them. "We're going to figure this out together." The bobcat blinked slowly in response, and Sarah could have sworn she saw approval in those wild yellow eyes. 2 weeks had passed since the morning of the bobcat's arrival, and Sarah's kitchen had transformed into a makeshift nursery. Her carefully drawn care schedule, taped to the refrigerator door, was covered in penciled notes and adjustments. Grey. One needs extra formula. Orange tabby, weight up 2 O's, black one opening eyes. The kittens now occupied a large plastic storage bin, cushioned with soft blankets and kept warm by a proper heating pad. They were growing stronger by the day, their tiny bodies plumping up on the expensive formula Sarah drove an hour each way to buy. "All right, little ones," Sarah said, checking her watch. 3 a.m. feeding time. She'd gotten used to the strange new rhythm of her days. Up every few hours through the night, catching naps when she could between farm chores and kitten. Kare, the bobcat, whom she'd started calling Lady, had become a constant presence. During the day, she lounged in the shade of the porch, watching Sarah's comings and goings with those intelligent yellow eyes. At night, she took up position beneath the kitchen window, as if standing guard. Sarah warmed the bottles of formula and settled into her feeding routine. Each kitten had its own personality now. The grey one was always first to cry for food. The orange tabby twins tumbled over each other to reach the bottle. The black one preferred to take its time, and the little white one, with grey patches, needed extra coaxing. "You chose well, Lady," Sarah said, glancing out the window where she knew the bobcat would be. "They're fighters, just like you." As if in response, a soft thump came from the porch, Lady's signature way of acknowledging Sarah's voice. That simple sound reminded Sarah of how far they'd come from that first uncertain morning. She remembered her initial visit to Doc Wilson, the local vet, carrying her box of kittens while trying to explain about the bobcat. The old veterinarian had listened with surprising patience, examining each kitten thoroughly before sharing his own theory. "Bobcats are solitary creatures," he'd said, "but they're also intelligent and adaptable. This one's probably lost her own litter and found these abandoned kittens. Instead of eating them, which would be the usual wild response, she's chosen to save them, and she chose you to help." Sarah had left his office with antibiotics for the kittens, detailed care instructions, and a new appreciation for the complexity of wild things. Doc Wilson had offered to take the kittens to a shelter, but Sarah had declined. She'd made a commitment, not just to the kittens, but to Lady as well. Now, watching the kittens nurse from their bottles, Sarah drew out her notebook and made her nightly observations. She'd started documenting everything: weights, feeding times, developmental milestones. The notebook had become a journal of this strange and wonderful journey. "Eyes fully open now," she wrote, "responding to sounds. Lady spent afternoon on porch, brought mouse, left it by door." She smiled at that last note. The bobcat had begun leaving small offerings, mice, rabbits, once even a quail, as if contributing to the household in her own way. Sarah had learned to move slowly when Lady was around, to speak softly and telegraph her movements. In return, the bobcat had grown comfortable enough to watch from closer distances, sometimes even remaining on the porch when Sarah needed to step outside. The grey kitten finished its bottle and hiccuped, drawing a quiet laugh from Sarah. "Just like your orange brother yesterday," she said, making another note. These midnight feeding sessions had become her favorite time, when the world was quiet and it felt natural to talk to both the kittens and their wild protector. Through the window, Sarah could see Lady's silhouette in the moonlight, keeping her faithful vigil. There was something comforting about that presence, about not being the only one awake and watching in the dark hours. For the first time since Tom's passing, the farmhouse didn't feel quite so empty. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was at Miller's feed store, stocking up on kitten formula and dairy supplements, when she noticed Nancy Miller staring at something on her phone. The shop owner's eyes kept darting between the screen and Sarah, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Sarah Thompson," Nancy finally said, turning her phone around. "Is this you?" Sarah's heart skipped as she recognized the image. A screenshot from her trail camera footage showing her walking across the field with Lady following at a distance. The local paper's website had run the story under the headline, "Local Farmer Forms Unlikely Bond with Wild Bobcat." "Doc Wilson's daughter works for the Herald," Nancy explained, still holding out the phone. "She saw your photos when you were in for the kittens' checkup. People are calling you the Bobcat Whisperer." Sarah felt her face flush. She'd been so focused on caring for the kittens and maintaining Lady's trust that she hadn't considered how the story might spread. The article had already gathered dozens of comments, many from familiar names in the community. "Oh, Lord," Sarah muttered, scanning the comments. "This is going to complicate things." But Nancy was already pulling out a notepad from under the counter. "Tell me what supplies you need for those kittens," she said, pen poised. "I've got some contacts who might be able to help with the specialty items." Before Sarah could respond, the bell above the store's door chimed. Martha Henderson, whose family leased Sarah's back 40, bustled in with her teenage daughter Emma in tow. "Sarah!" Martha called out, waving her phone. "We just saw the article. Emma here is desperate to help. She's been bottle-feeding our barn cat's kittens since she was 10. Emma nodded eagerly. "I could help with the night feedings," she offered. "Mum says I can drive over after school too. I mean, if you want the help." Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the sudden attention and offers of assistance. For weeks, she'd been handling everything alone, sharing her strange new reality only with Lady and Doc Wilson. Now, standing in Miller's feed store with 3 generations of local women discussing kitten formula and feeding schedules, she felt something shift. Nancy was already on the phone with her supplier. "Yes, we'll need to double our usual order of KMR formula. Yes, and those special feeding bottles. Put it on my account for now." "Nancy, I can't let you—" Sarah started to protest, but the older woman waved her off. "Consider it an investment in a good story," Nancy said, covering the phone's mouthpiece. "Besides, Tom helped my Jack out of more than one tight spot with that dairy herd of his. It's time we return the favor." The bell chimed again, and Sarah turned to see Doc Wilson himself ambling in, his weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Figured I'd find you here," he said, pulling a folder from his jacket. "Got some information about Bobcat behavior you might want to look at. And a reporter from the state paper called my office this morning. Thought you might want to talk about how to handle that." Sarah sank onto a nearby feed bag, feeling slightly overwhelmed. The article had opened a door she hadn't even known was there. The secret she'd been nurturing in her quiet farmhouse was now out in the world, growing and changing like the kittens themselves. "I don't know what to say," she managed finally. Martha sat down beside her, patting her hand. "Say yes to the help, for starters. This community's been through enough hard times to know a miracle when we see one, even if it comes with fur and whiskers." Emma was already making notes on her phone. "I can start a social media account to document everything. People love this kind of story. It could help raise awareness about wildlife rescue." As if to punctuate the teenager's words, Nancy's phone buzzed with another notification. "Look at this," she said, showing them the screen. Someone had shared the article to a statewide nature group, and the comments were flooding in with offers of support and resources. Sarah thought about Lady, probably watching the farmhouse at this very moment, and the 5 growing kittens who had changed everything. She thought about Tom, and how he would have loved seeing their farm become a place of such unexpected purpose. "All right," she said finally, straightening her shoulders. "But we do this carefully. Lady's trust didn't come easy, and those kittens need stability." The group nodded in understanding, and soon the feed store became an impromptu command center, with Nancy's counter covered in lists and plans. Outside, the spring sun shone on a day that felt full of possibility. The official notice arrived 3 weeks after the newspaper article, its government letterhead stark against the morning's regular mail. Sarah read it twice at her kitchen table, her coffee growing cold beside her. The county was concerned about unauthorized animal care activities and potential wildlife interference on her property. Through the window, she could see Lady lounging in her usual spot near the garden, seemingly unaware that her presence had sparked a bureaucratic firestorm. The kittens, now active and playful in their expanded enclosure in the spare room, tumbled over each other in a game of chase. Emma Henderson's social media updates about the Bobcat Whisperer had gone viral, drawing attention far beyond their small farming community. What had started as local interest had exploded into something Sarah barely recognized. Yesterday, she'd caught 2 cars parked along her fence line, their occupants hoping to photograph Lady. "What do you make of this?" Sarah asked Doc Wilson. Later that morning, sliding the notice across his desk during the kitten's weekly checkup, The veterinarian adjusted his reading glasses, frowning as he scanned the document. "Seems someone's worried you're running an unlicensed wildlife sanctuary," he said finally. "Which, technically speaking, you are." "But I'm not running anything," Sarah protested. "I'm just helping some kittens. And Lady, well, she came on her own. Try explaining that to the county inspectors." Doc Wilson leaned back in his chair. "Things have changed since that article went up. People are bringing me injured wildlife, asking if you'll take them. 3 different conservation groups have called my office asking about you." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "I can't take in more animals. I can barely manage—" A commotion in the waiting room interrupted her. Martha Henderson's voice carried through the door. "Sarah, you need to see this." Martha burst in, her tablet, displaying a local community forum. Someone had posted photos of Sarah's farm, complete with detailed directions for wildlife enthusiasts to visit the famous Bobcat farm. "There's more," Martha said, scrolling through comments. "People are organizing weekend visits. Some want to bring their kids to see the Bobcat. Others are asking if you take injured animals." Sarah sank into a chair, the county notice crumpling in her hand. "This is getting out of control." "It certainly is," a new voice added. They turned to see Nancy Miller in the doorway, holding a cardboard box. "Found these by my dumpster this morning." Inside, 2 raccoon kits blinked up at them, clearly abandoned by someone hoping Sarah would find them. "I can't," Sarah started to say, but her voice caught as one of the kits chirped weakly. Doc Wilson sighed, reaching for his phone. "I know someone at the State Wildlife Department. Let me make some calls. We need to do this right, or that county notice will be just the beginning of your troubles." Sarah thought about the dairy herd. She'd already had to reduce the maintenance she'd been postponing, the feed bills that kept growing. "I can't afford to make this official," she admitted. "The farm's barely breaking, even as it is." "Maybe you don't have to do it alone," Martha suggested. "The community bulletin board at church is full of people asking how they can help. Emma's already got over 1,000 followers on that Instagram account she made for you." Nancy nodded, settling the raccoon kits more comfortably in their box. "Sometimes the good Lord sends us down a path we never expected. Tom always said this farm had more potential than just dairy." Sarah looked out the clinic window toward her truck, where the carrier holding 5 growing kittens waited. Beyond the parking lot, she could see the hills where she'd first spotted Lady that fateful morning. Everything had seemed so simple then. Doc Wilson cleared his throat. "Way I see it, you've got 2 choices. You can shut this all down, rehome the kittens, put up no trespassing signs, try to discourage Lady from visiting. Or, Sarah asked, though she already knew where this was heading, "or we figure out how to do this properly, make it legal, make it safe, make it something that could help not just these animals, but the whole community." The raccoon kits squeaked from their box, as if adding their vote to the discussion. The storm struck without warning, a late spring tempest that turned the afternoon sky an ominous shade of green. Sarah stood in the barn doorway, studying the weather-beaten plans she'd pulled from Tom's old filing cabinet, the original blueprint. For the barn renovation he'd dreamed of now seemed prophetic. Extra stalls, a medical treatment area, even a small living space above. "Not now," she muttered as thunder rolled across the sky. The raccoon kits were safely settled in a makeshift enclosure in the tack room, but the kittens were still in the house, and Lady had been unusually agitated all morning. The first drops of rain hit the tin roof just as Emma's car pulled into the drive. The teenager burst through the barn door, soaked from the brief dash from her car. "The weather service issued a severe storm warning," she gasped. "Possible tornado conditions. Mom sent me to help with the animals." A sharp crack of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by deafening thunder. The lights flickered and went out. Through the darkness, they heard the frightened bleating of the remaining dairy cows. "Get the emergency lanterns," Sarah ordered, already moving toward the cow stalls. "And check on the raccoons." The wind picked up, howling through every crack in the old barn's walls. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Doc Wilson. Headed your way. Got supplies if you need to evacuate animals. Another lightning strike illuminated the barn in stark relief, and Sarah saw what had been bothering Lady all morning. Water was seeping under the north wall, right where the foundation had been showing signs of wear. "Emma," she called out, "get the sandbags from the feed room, the ones we used for flooding last spring." They worked in frantic synchronization, positioning sandbags while checking on increasingly anxious animals. The raccoon kits chittered nervously in their enclosure, and the cows huddled together, eyes rolling at each thunderclap. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Martha this time. "Power out across county. Need help?" Before she could reply, a sound cut. Through the storm's fury, Lady's distinctive yowl, coming from the direction of the house. "The kittens," Sarah breathed, suddenly remembering they were alone in the spare room. Without the power, the heating pad wouldn't be working. "Emma, stay with the animals. I need to check the house." She sprinted through the deluge, rain stinging her face. The farmhouse loomed dark against the stormy sky, but she could see Lady on the porch, pacing frantically. Inside, water was already seeping under the back door. Sarah rushed upstairs, following the sound of distressed mewing. The kitten's enclosure was intact, but the room was growing cold. Lady appeared at her side, somehow having slipped in through a window Sarah had left. Cracked for ventilation. The Bobcat went straight to the kittens, checking them before looking at Sarah with those intelligent eyes. "You're right," Sarah said, already gathering supplies. "They can't stay here." She bundled the kittens into their travel carrier, grabbed their formula and bottles, and headed back into the storm. Lady followed, a shadow through the rain. The barn was a beacon of lantern light when they returned. Doc Wilson's truck had arrived, and he and Emma were moving the raccoon kits to a more secure corner. "Sarah," Emma called out, "the north wall's getting worse." Working by lantern light, they moved animals to safer areas, reinforced walls with extra sandbags, and set up an emergency care station using Doc Wilson's supplies. Through it all, Lady remained watching from the hayloft as if supervising their efforts. Hours passed. The storm raged, tested their defenses, tried to break through. But in that barn, surrounded by the unlikely family she'd gathered, Emma, with her boundless energy, Doc Wilson with his steady expertise, the animals under their care, and Lady's watchful presence, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since Tom's passing, the strength of purpose. When the storm finally began to ease, Sarah found herself sitting on a hay bale, feeding the kittens while Lady lounged nearby. The raccoon kits were sleeping soundly in their reinforced enclosure, and the cows had settled back into quiet contentment. Doc Wilson sat down beside her, his weathered face thoughtful in the lantern light. "You know," he said, gesturing at the scene around them, "this is exactly the kind of setup a proper wildlife sanctuary would need." Sarah looked at Tom's old renovation plans, now slightly damp, but still readable, then at the barn around her. To battered but standing strong, something clicked into place in her mind, a vision of what could be. The sanctuary permit application sat open on Sarah's kitchen table, its multiple pages spread out like a paper maze. Emma had printed it from the State Wildlife Department's website, and now they were working through it section by section, the afternoon sun casting long shadows over their notes and coffee cups. "Previous experience with wildlife rehabilitation," Emma read aloud, checking another box. "Well, we've got Lady and the raccoons, plus all those references from Doc Wilson." Sarah nodded, adding another note to the margins. The application was daunting. Pages of regulations, requirements, and responsibilities. But after the storm 3 days ago, she'd made her decision. If she was going to do this, she would do it right. Martha Henderson appeared at the screen door, carrying a basket of fresh muffins. "Thought you could use some brain food," she said, letting herself in. "Nancy's been making calls all morning. You won't believe who she found." As if on cue, Nancy's SUV pulled into the driveway, and she emerged with a tall woman in professional attire. Through the window, Sarah could see Lady watching from her usual spot near the garden, alert but unthreatened. "Sarah," Nancy called out, ushering her guest inside. "Meet Patricia Reeves. She used to run the wildlife sanctuary over in Blue River before she retired. She's willing to help us get set up properly." Patricia's eyes swept the kitchen, taking in the permit application, the feeding schedules posted on the fridge, the box of supplies from Doc Wilson. "Nancy's told me quite a story," she said, her voice warm with interest. "Mind if I see your current setup?" Sarah led the group through her improvised operation. The kittens were thriving in their enclosure, now big enough to wobble around on uncertain legs. The raccoon kits had graduated to a larger space in the barn, which still bore traces of their sandbagging efforts from the storm. "You've got good instincts," Patricia commented, making notes on a small pad. "The spacing, the temperature control, the feeding schedules, all solid foundations. But there's a lot more we'll need to consider." She pulled out her own folder, filled with photos and plans from her former sanctuary. "A proper facility needs quarantine areas, medical spaces, outdoor rehabilitation enclosures. Plus, you'll need proper training, certificates, emergency protocols." Sarah's head spun at the growing list, but Emma was already typing everything into her tablet. "We can document the whole process for social media," the teenager said excitedly. "Show people how a real sanctuary comes together." Martha squeezed Sarah's arm encouragingly. "The church committee voted this morning. They want to hold a fundraiser to help with the startup costs. And I've got suppliers willing to donate materials," Nancy added. "After that storm coverage went viral, everyone wants to help the Bobcat Whisperer expand her mission." Sarah turned to Patricia. "Is it always this complicated?" The older woman smiled. "Building a sanctuary? Yes, but having this kind of community support, that's rare. Most of us start alone, fighting for every resource. You've got something special here, Sarah." They returned to the kitchen, where Patricia began marking up the permit application with practiced efficiency. "We'll need to rework your barn layout," she said, sketching on a spare piece of paper. "Those renovation plans you showed me are actually a good start, with some modifications." A soft thud at the screen door interrupted her. Lady had appeared on the porch, a rabbit held carefully in her mouth. It was alive, its leg clearly injured but otherwise intact. "Well?" Patricia breathed, watching as the bobcat gently set down her burden. "I've never seen anything quite like that." Sarah grabbed a towel and rescue carrier, her movements practiced now. "She's been doing this more often. Bringing injured animals, I mean. It's like she's expanding her mission," Patricia suggested quietly. "Animals are smarter than we give them credit for. Sometimes they understand what we're trying to build before we do." Emma was already documenting the rescue, her camera capturing the moment the injured rabbit was safely contained. "Our followers are going to love this," she said. "The comments on the storm video are still coming in. People want to know how they can help." Sarah looked around her kitchen, at the permit application that would change everything, at the community leaders who'd rallied to her cause, at the wild bobcat who'd started it all. The path ahead was daunting, but for the first time it felt clear. "All right," she said, pulling the application closer. "Tell me what we need to do first." Patricia smiled, uncapping her pen. "Let's start with the basics. Every sanctuary needs a name." Through the screen door, they could hear the kittens playing in their enclosure, their happy tumbling a soundtrack to new beginnings. The security camera footage played on Sarah's laptop, its infrared glow casting the nighttime scene in ethereal green. Emma had insisted on installing the cameras after the storm, and now Sarah was glad she had. What they captured was remarkable. Lady wasn't working alone. The recording showed 3 bobcats moving through the pre-dawn darkness, Lady in the lead, followed by 2 others, each carrying something in their mouths. They moved with purpose, delivering their injured charges to the barn's new rescue entrance before disappearing into the shadows. "I've never seen anything like it," Patricia said, replaying the footage for the 3rd time. Bobcats are solitary creatures. This kind of coordinated behavior, it's unprecedented. Sarah thought back to that first morning when Lady had appeared with the kittens. Maybe they've always done this, she mused. We just never gave them a safe place to do it before. The last week had brought 5 new arrivals, 2 injured rabbits, a young fox with a damaged paw, and 2 more kittens, barely older than the first batch. Each delivery followed the same pattern, always near dawn, always carefully placed where Sarah would find them. Emma burst through the door, tablet in hand. You have to see this. She pulled up a wildlife forum where amateur photographers shared their shots. People are spotting bobcats all over the county, and look, they're all carrying injured animals. The photos told an extraordinary story. Bobcats had been seen crossing fields, moving through forest edges, even skirting suburban areas. Each one was carefully transporting some kind of injured wildlife. They're networking, Patricia breathed, studying the images, creating their own rescue system. Sarah walked to the window, watching Lady in her usual spot. The bobcat was grooming herself calmly, as if she hadn't just upended everything they thought they knew about wild animal behavior. The sanctuary was taking shape around them. The barn renovation was underway, funded by the community's fundraising efforts. Patricia had fast-tracked their permit application, citing the unique nature of their operation. Even the county officials, who'd once sent warning notices, were now regular visitors, fascinated by what was happening. We need to document everything, Patricia said, pulling out her ever-present notebook. The academic community will want proper records. This could change how we think about wildlife rehabilitation. Emma was already ahead of her, creating a database of each arrival, species, condition, delivery time, and which bobcat had brought them. Look at this pattern, she said, pointing to her screen. They're bringing the most seriously injured animals to us first. They're triaging. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Doc Wilson. 3 more arrivals at the clinic, all brought in by locals who spotted bobcats dropping them near the road. Should I send them your way? The implications were staggering. Lady hadn't just found a safe place for rescued animals. She'd started a movement. Somehow, she'd communicated to other bobcats that there was a place where injured wildlife could find help. We're going to need more space, Sarah said, looking at the treatment area they'd set up. It was already near capacity, and if this pattern continued, the Hendersons called this morning, Emma offered. They want to donate their part of the leased land back to the sanctuary, said it was worth more as a wildlife haven than farmland. Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, overwhelmed by how quickly everything was evolving. The original 5 kittens, watched from their play area, now nearly ready for adoption. Lady had given them a chance at life, and in doing so, had started something much bigger. The security camera feed blinked with new movement. Another bobcat, this one unfamiliar, was approaching the barn with careful steps. In its mouth was a small raccoon, injured but alive. Well, Sarah said, reaching for her rescue gloves, looks like we've got work to do. Outside, Lady rose from her spot and stretched, ready to oversee another rescue. In the growing dawn light, she looked less like a wild creature and more like a partner in something extraordinary. The check sat on Sarah's kitchen table, its amount almost unbelievable. The Wilkinson Foundation's logo gleamed in the corner, and beside it lay their official letter, "We are pleased to support the groundbreaking work at the Thompson Wildlife Haven." Sarah traced the zeros with a trembling finger. More money than the farm had made in its best years. More than enough to build everything they needed. "Read it again," Emma said, perched on the counter with her ever-present tablet. She'd been documenting everything since the Foundation's representatives had visited last week, drawn by the viral videos of their bobcat rescue network. "In recognition of the unique interspecies cooperation observed at your facility," Sarah read aloud, "and the groundbreaking potential for wildlife rehabilitation studies, we are pleased to award this initial grant." "Initial," Emma squealed. "They said initial." Patricia sat across the table, already sketching expansion plans. This changes everything. We can build proper rehabilitation enclosures, hire full-time staff, set up that veterinary clinic Docky Wilson's been dreaming about. Through the window they could see the construction crews already at work on the barn renovation. The original plans had been modified so many times they were practically unrecognizable, but Tom's basic design remained. At the core, Sarah liked to think he would have approved. Lady watched the construction from her usual spot, seemingly unfazed by the activity. She'd grown comfortable with the increasing number of people on the property, as long as they respected her boundaries. The other Bobcats were more cautious, but they still came, delivering their injured charges with unwavering dedication. The State Wildlife Department called again, Patricia mentioned, checking her phone. They want to make us an official rehabilitation center for the entire region. Said our success rate with injured wildlife is unprecedented. Sarah thought about how far they'd come from that first morning with the kittens. Those original 5 were now healthy and ready for adoption, though Sarah suspected at least a couple would be staying on as permanent residents. They'd become the sanctuary's unofficial mascots, their story drawing support from around the country. The laptop on the counter chimed with a new alert from their security system. Another Bobcat had arrived. This one they hadn't seen before. On screen they watched it carefully place an injured owl near the rescue entrance. That's the 3rd new one this week, Emma noted, updating their database. The network keeps growing. We've documented over 20 different Bobcats now. Sarah picked up the Foundation's letter again, reading the part that had first made her throat tight. Your facility represents a new model of wildlife rehabilitation, one that works in partnership with nature rather than simply imposing human solutions. The observed cooperation between wild Bobcats and your sanctuary staff suggests possibilities we are only beginning to understand. A knock at the screen door interrupted her reading. Doc Wilson entered, followed by 2 younger veterinarians. Sorry to interrupt, he said, though his grin suggested he wasn't sorry at all. But these folks just finished their wildlife rehabilitation certification. Thought you might want to interview them for those staff positions we discussed. Patricia was already pulling out her hiring checklist. The sanctuary's permit now required certified staff on site around the clock, a requirement they could finally fulfill thanks to the Foundation's grant. Give us a minute, Sarah said, gathering the paperwork. To the young vets, she added, why don't you take a walk around the property? Get a feel for what we're building here. As the group headed out, Sarah paused by the window. The morning sun lit the farm, her farm now transformed into something else entirely. Construction vehicles moved across the east field, where she'd first spotted Lady. The old dairy barn was becoming a state-of-the-art wildlife hospital. Even the Hendersons' returned land was being prepared for new rehabilitation enclosures. Emma appeared at her side, camera ready as always. Want to record a thank you video for our supporters? She asked. The Foundation said we could announce the grant today. Sarah nodded, but her eyes were on Lady, who had risen from her spot and was approaching the newest Bobcat. There was something regal in her bearing, as if she knew exactly what she had helped create. Let's do it outside, Sarah said. Everyone should see where it all started. The emergency protocol manual lay open on the new treatment room's counter, its pages still crisp and untested. Until now, their rescues had been relatively straightforward. Injured rabbits, abandoned kittens, the occasional hurt bird. But what Lady had brought them this morning was different. The young mountain lion lay sedated on the examination table, its mangled leg telling a story of a run-in with a poacher's trap. Dr. Kate Chen, one of their new wildlife veterinarians, worked quickly while rattling off supply needs to her team. We need more plasma, she called out, not looking up from her work. And get Patricia on the phone. We need her mountain lion rehabilitation experience. Sarah pressed her phone to her ear, trying to reach Patricia while watching the procedure. Through the observation window, Lady paced in the hallway behind her, refusing to leave despite the sanctuary's usual protocols about wild animals indoors. She led us right to it. Emma said quietly, documenting everything with her camera. She and two other bobcats. They were taking turns dragging it, keeping it alive. They worked together to bring it almost 3 miles. The security footage had captured the extraordinary rescue. 3 bobcats, working in relay teams, had transported an animal many times their size across fields and through woods. They'd kept the mountain lion alive through the night, and when dawn came, they'd brought it to the only place they knew could help. "Patricia's on her way," Sarah announced, ending the call. "She says to check the manual's appendix for mountain lion dietary requirements. We'll need to convert one of the new enclosures for long-term rehabilitation." Dr. Chen nodded without pausing her work. "Blood pressure's stabilizing. Lauren, start an antibiotic drip. Mike, prepare the surgical kit. This leg needs more than just stitches." The next hours passed in a blur of medical terminology and careful procedures. The mountain lion's injuries were severe, but not impossible to repair. Through it all, Lady remained, watching through windows and doors as if supervising their efforts. Sarah found herself thinking of that first morning with the kittens. How small and simple it had seemed then. Now here they were, their facility, equipped with modern medical equipment, staffed by experienced professionals, ready to handle even this level of emergency. "Sarah!" Emma's urgent voice cut through her thoughts. "You need to see this!" Outside, a small crowd had gathered at the sanctuary's gates. Word had spread about the mountain lion rescue, and local news crews were setting up cameras. But it wasn't the media that caught Sarah's attention. It was the other bobcats, at least 5 of them, sitting calmly at the edge of the property. "They're waiting," Emma whispered, her own camera capturing the scene. "They want to know if we can save it." The weight of their trust settled on Sarah's shoulders. This wasn't just about saving one animal anymore. It was about proving they deserved the faith these wild creatures had placed in them. Hours later, Dr. Chen emerged from surgery, her scrubs showing signs of the intense procedure. "We've stabilized the leg," she announced. "The next 24 hours will be critical, but I think we can save both the cat and the limb." A collective breath of relief swept through the team. Outside, as if sensing the news, the waiting bobcats began to disappear back into the wilderness. One by one, only Lady remained, taking up her usual watchful position. Sarah retreated to her office, once her farmhouse kitchen, and sank into her chair. The emergency protocol manual had proved its worth today, but she knew they'd need to update it with everything they'd learned. On her desk, next to the Foundation's grant letter, lay the morning's mail. 3 more wildlife organizations requesting their procedures and protocols. "You okay?" Emma asked from the doorway. "That was pretty intense." Sarah nodded, watching through her window as the sanctuary settled back into its routine. The original kittens, now sanctuary mascots, played in their outdoor enclosure. The rehabilitation areas were full of recovering animals, each brought by their growing network of bobcat rescuers. And now, in their intensive care unit lay a mountain lion, proof that their small miracle had grown into something far bigger than they'd imagined. "We're more than okay," Sarah said finally. "We're ready." Lady appeared at the window, meeting Sarah's eyes with that familiar, intelligent gaze. In the distance, a new bobcat emerged from the tree line, carrying what looked like an injured fox kit. Another day, another rescue, another chance to prove worthy of this extraordinary partnership. Dr. Chen held up the small device to the light, examining the faded numbers on its weathered surface. The tracking collar had fallen off Lady during the morning's commotion, when she'd been helping guide another injured animal to the sanctuary. "It's at least 5 years old," Dr. Chen said, connecting the collar to her laptop. "Standard wildlife research tag. Let me see if I can pull up the ID number." Sarah watched Lady through the window, realizing that after all these months, they might finally learn where their extraordinary friend had come from. The bobcat seemed unperturbed by the loss of her collar, grooming herself contentedly in her usual spot. "Got it," Dr. Chen announced, her eyes scanning the database results. She was part of a behavioral study at the Blue River Research Center. "Wait," She looked up at Sarah. That's where Patricia used to work. The pieces started falling into place. Sarah reached for her phone, but Patricia was already calling her. I saw the caller notification, Patricia said when Sarah answered. I should have recognized her sooner, but it's been so many years. We called her Luna back then. Tell me everything, Sarah said, putting the phone on speaker so Dr. Chen and Emma could hear. She was unique from the start, Patricia began. Most bobcats we tracked kept to themselves, but Luna, she would help injured animals in the research area. We documented her bringing food to injured deer, guiding lost fawns back to their mothers. When the center lost funding and closed, she disappeared. I always wondered what happened to her. Emma was already pulling up the center's old research papers. Look at this, she said, turning her tablet around. They have photos of her helping other animals. She's been doing this her whole life. But why here? Sarah wondered aloud. Why my farm? There was a pause on the phone before Patricia answered. Sarah, don't you remember? The Blue River Center was only about 20 miles from your farm. When they shut it down, all those animals needed somewhere to go. Luna must have been watching, learning, looking for a new, safe place. She found your farm and waited years for the right moment. Dr. Chen added, thoughtful, for someone who would understand what she was trying to show them. Sarah thought back to that first morning when Lady Luna had appeared with the kittens. It hadn't been a random choice. The bobcat had been observing, perhaps for years, waiting for the right opportunity to create something like what she'd lost. There's more, Patricia said. Those other bobcats that have been helping, some of their markings match ones we used to track. Luna's not just creating a sanctuary, she's rebuilding the network she was part of at the research center. Outside, as if aware she was the topic of conversation, Lady stood and stretched. Another bobcat had appeared at the property's edge, and they watched as Lady walked over to greet it. There was something almost ceremonial in their interaction, like old friends reconnecting. She's been teaching them, Emma realized, her camera capturing the moment. Everything she learned at the research center, she's been passing on to other bobcats. That's why they all know to bring injured animals here. Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes. All this time, they'd thought they were building something new, when really they were helping Lady restore something that had been lost. The bobcat hadn't just found a new sanctuary. She'd found someone to help her rebuild her life's work. Dr. Chen turned the old collar over in her hands. Should we put it back on her? Sarah watched Lady guide the new bobcat toward the rehabilitation area where an injured deer was recovering. No, she said softly. She's not a research subject anymore. She's a partner. The Blue River data could help us understand her better, Emma suggested. Maybe help us work with the other bobcats more effectively. Patricia's voice came through, the phone warm with approval. I'll send you everything we have. But Sarah's right. Luna's moved beyond being just a study subject. She's showing us something entirely new about what animals are capable of. Lady returned to her spot near the window, settling down to watch over her expanding domain. The sanctuary had become more than just a haven for injured wildlife. It was the fulfillment of a vision that had started years ago, carried in the heart of one remarkable bobcat who refused to give up on the idea that humans and animals could work together to help those in need. The farm deed lay on Sarah's desk next to the new sanctuary proposal. Her grandfather's signature was still visible on the yellow document passed down through generations until it reached Tom and then her. Now she had to decide whether to sign away the last of the dairy operation, transforming the entire property into a permanent wildlife sanctuary. Dr. Chen's latest reports made the need clear. They were running out of space. The mountain lion's successful recovery had brought even more attention, and with it, more animals. The remaining dairy barn was the only logical place to expand the rehabilitation facilities. The cows are more pets than business now anyway, Martha said gently. She'd stopped by with lunch, knowing Sarah had been wrestling with the decision all week. 6 cows hardly makes a dairy farm. Sarah traced her fingers over the deed's embossed seal. It's not just about the cows. It's about what this place was meant to be, what Tom and I planned. Plans change, Martha said, nodding toward the window. Outside, Lady was leading 2 younger bobcats through what had become an informal training routine, showing them the sanctuary's layout and protocols. Sometimes they change for the better. The sanctuary's success had exceeded everyone's expectations. Their Bobcat-assisted rescue model was being studied by wildlife organizations around the world. Graduate students were applying for internships, hoping to understand the extraordinary communication network Lady had built. Emma burst through the door, tablet in hand. "Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." She pulled up a wildlife conservation website. "They're calling us a revolution in wildlife rehabilitation. Listen, the Thompson Wildlife Haven represents a new paradigm in human-animal cooperation, demonstrating that traditional farming land can be transformed into something that serves both wildlife and the local community." Sarah smiled at the teenager's enthusiasm, but her eyes were drawn back to the deed. The decision wasn't just about land use, it was about legacy. Her grandfather had built this farm to provide for his family. Tom had maintained it with the same purpose. Now she had the chance to give it a new meaning, but was it the right? A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Lady and her bobcat trainees escorting an injured fox toward the treatment center. The wild animals moved with confident purpose, as comfortable on the farm as any domestic creature. "Tom would have loved this," Martha said softly. "Remember how he was always talking about finding new ways to use the land? About making it matter?" Sarah did remember. Long nights at the kitchen table, Tom sketching out plans for diversifying the farm, trying to find ways to make it more than just another struggling dairy operation. He'd wanted it to mean something, to make a difference. "The foundation called again," Emma added, scrolling through her messages. "They want to double their funding if we commit to the full conversion." Said something about securing the future of innovative wildlife rehabilitation. Sarah stood and walked to the window. The property stretched out before her, the east field where she'd first spotted Lady. The renovated barn now serving as a state-of-the-art treatment center, the Hendersons' returned land already supporting new rehabilitation enclosures. Even the old oak tree had found a new purpose, serving as an observation post for recovering birds. Lady appeared at the window, as if sensing Sarah's turbulent thoughts. Their eyes met, and Sarah remembered what Patricia had said about the Bobcats' own journey, how she'd held on to her mission even after losing her first sanctuary, how she'd found a way to rebuild something even better. "Bring me the papers," Sarah said finally. "All of them." Emma quickly laid out the documents, the deed, the sanctuary expansion proposal, the foundation's new grant offer. One by one, Sarah signed them, her signature marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. "It's still a family farm," she said, watching the last dairy cows grazing in their pasture. "We're just expanding the definition of family." Martha squeezed her shoulder, understanding the weight of the moment. Outside, as if celebrating the decision, Lady led her latest group of trainees on another tour of their growing sanctuary. The bobcats moved with the confidence of creatures who knew they belonged, who understood their role in something larger than themselves. "Tom's dream was to make this land matter," Sarah said, straightening the signed papers. "I think we've found a way to make it matter more than he ever imagined." The release protocol document was crisp in Sarah's hands, each step carefully outlined by Patricia and Dr. Chen. Today would be their first major release. 3 recovered deer, 2 foxes, and the mountain lion that had tested their capabilities. Months ago, the success of these releases would prove whether their sanctuary could fulfill its ultimate purpose, returning healed animals to the wild. "Everything's ready," Dr. Chen reported, checking her tablet. "Tracking collars are activated, release zones are cleared, and the observation teams are in position." Emma adjusted her camera settings, determined to document every moment. The sanctuary's social media followers had been waiting weeks for this day, watching the animal's recovery progress through her daily updates. "Look who's here to help," Martha called softly from the observation deck. Lady had appeared at the edge of the release zone, accompanied by 4 other bobcats. They spaced themselves around the perimeter as if they understood their role in this carefully choreographed operation. "They're going to guide them," Sarah realized. "Just like they guide injured animals to us, they're going to help guide the healthy ones back." Dr. Chen nodded, unsurprised. "They've been watching our rehabilitation process all along. They understand these animals are ready to return." The mountain lion was first. They'd named him Ridge, and his recovery had become a symbol of the sanctuary's capabilities. His formerly mangled leg was now fully healed, though he would always carry a slight limp. The tracking collar around his neck would let them monitor his progress and confirm their rehabilitation methods. Sarah checked the protocol document one last time, then nodded to the release team. The door to Ridge's enclosure opened slowly. The mountain lion emerged cautiously, testing the air. Lady watched from her position. Totally unafraid of the larger predator, Ridge took his first steps into freedom, moving with growing confidence. One of Lady's bobcats rose and began walking toward the forest, looking back as if to say, "Follow me." To everyone's amazement, Ridge did just that, falling into step behind his smaller guide. "It's working," Emma whispered, her camera capturing the extraordinary moment. "They're actually helping with the release!" One by one, the other animals were released. Each time, a bobcat would step forward to guide them toward appropriate territory. The deer moved in a small herd, escorted by 2 bobcats. The foxes trotted alongside their guides as if they'd rehearsed it. "They're taking them to safe territories," Patricia observed, watching through binoculars. "Areas with good hunting, water sources, natural shelter. They know exactly where these animals need to go." Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she watched. Their first rehabilitated animals disappear into the wilderness. The sanctuary had just proven it could do more than just heal. It could successfully return animals to the wild, with help from their remarkable bobcat partners. Lady remained behind after the other bobcats had departed with their charges. She sat near Sarah, both of them watching the tree line where their success stories had vanished. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Sarah said softly. "That we could do more than just rescue, that we could help them find their way back too." The bobcat's wise eyes met hers, holding that familiar, intelligent gaze. Then Lady rose and padded toward the forest herself, likely going to check on her network of helpers and their charges. Dr. Chen was already reviewing the tracking data on her tablet. "All the collars are working. We'll be able to monitor their progress, see how well they readjust to the wild. This data will be invaluable for future releases." Emma lowered her camera, grinning. "The video's already going viral. People can't believe how the bobcats helped with the release. We're getting messages from wildlife centers around the world." Sarah tucked the protocol document into her folder, knowing they'd be updating it with everything they'd learned today. Each release would teach them more, help them refine their methods. But the basic truth had been proven. Their sanctuary could heal animals and return them to the wild, thanks to an extraordinary partnership with Lady and her growing network. "Let's head back," she said, taking one last look at the forest. "We've got more animals waiting for their turn, more work to do." Behind them, the sanctuary buzzed with activity. More injured animals had arrived that morning, brought by their ever-vigilant bobcat rescuers. The cycle would continue: rescue, rehabilitate, release. Each success strengthening the bridge they'd built between the human and wild worlds. The regional wildlife map filled an entire wall of Sarah's office, dotted with colored pins and connected by strings that tracked the expanding network of animal rescues. Red pins showed confirmed bobcat sightings, blue marked successful releases, and yellow highlighted new sanctuary locations inspired by their model. 3 more centers reported bobcat activities this week, Emma said, adding new pins to the map. 2 in Nebraska, one in South Dakota. They're all following our protocols. Sarah studied the pattern emerging on the map. The pins radiated outward from their sanctuary like ripples in a pond, each representing a place where their methods were being adopted, and, remarkably, where bobcats were beginning to help. Lady's descendants, Dr. Chen suggested, pointing to a cluster of red pins. The GPS data shows some of her trained bobcats have migrated to these areas. They're teaching others what they learned here. The concept still amazed Sarah, that Lady's influence could spread so far, creating a network of wildlife helpers across state lines. Other sanctuaries had been skeptical at first, but the evidence was undeniable. Bobcats were appearing at wildlife centers throughout the region, bringing injured animals and even assisting with releases. The Montana Center sent their latest data, Emma continued, pulling up her tablet. Their resident bobcat, the one Lady trained here, has already recruited 3 others. They've documented 15 successful rescues in the past month. Sarah touched one of the yellow pins, remembering her visit to that sanctuary last month. They'd completely redesigned their facility based on her recommendations, creating safe spaces where bobcats could interact with the rehabilitation process. The State Wildlife Department called again, Dr. Chen added. They want to make our protocols the official standard for rehabilitation centers in the region. Said our success rate is unprecedented. The proof was in their data. Centers that adopted their methods and worked with local bobcats were seeing recovery rates nearly double the national average. The animals they released showed higher survival rates, better adaptation to the wild, and most surprisingly, a tendency to seek help if they were injured again. Look at this, Emma said excitedly, pulling up a video on her tablet. The Wyoming sanctuary caught this last night. The footage showed a deer with a previously healed leg injury leading 2 injured young deer to the sanctuary's entrance. The deer had been released from their facility months ago, its healed injury matching their records. Now it was bringing others who needed help. It's not just the bobcats anymore, Sarah realized. The animals they help are learning to help others too. A soft thud at the window announced Lady's arrival. She sat outside, observing their map with what seemed like approval. 2 younger bobcats, part of her latest training group, waited respectfully behind her. Should we show her the new numbers? Emma asked with a smile, holding up a report. Their sanctuary's success had attracted international attention. Wildlife researchers from 3 continents were currently studying their methods, trying to understand how this remarkable partnership had developed. Sarah opened the window, letting in the crisp autumn air. What do you think, Lady? Ready to help us train some more sanctuaries? The bobcat's response was to stand and gesture to her trainees, leading them toward the rehabilitation area where new arrivals waited. The message was clear. There was work to be done here first. Dr. Chen laughed softly. She keeps us focused on what matters. The network will grow at its own pace. Sarah turned back to the map, to all those pins representing places where animals and humans were learning to work together in new ways. Each one had started with a leap of faith, believing that what had happened here could happen elsewhere, that Lady's gift for bringing species together could be taught and shared. The Australian group arrives next week, Emma reminded her, checking their calendar. They want to see if similar methods could work with dingoes. And the African delegation the week after that, Dr. Chen added. They're interested in adapting the program for cheetahs. Sarah nodded, adding new pins to mark these potential expansions. The map was becoming crowded, but each pin represented hope. Hope that what had started with 1 bobcat and some abandoned kittens could grow into something that changed how humans and animals helped each other around the world. The new sanctuary sign gleamed in the morning sun. Thompson Wildlife Haven, where hope finds a home. Sarah stood back, admiring how it looked mounted on the renovated entrance gates. After a year of incredible growth and change, it felt right to finally make it official. Perfect timing, Emma said, adjusting her camera. Look who's coming to inspect the new sign. Lady appeared from the brush, but she wasn't alone. Behind her trotted 5 young bobcats, and behind them, Sarah's breath caught, came the original 5 kittens, now grown into healthy adult cats who had chosen to make the sanctuary their home. "It's like she's showing them where it all began," Emma whispered, filming the procession, but Lady wasn't finished with her surprises. From the tree line emerged more animals. Ridge, the mountain lion, now the proud father of 2 cubs, several of their successfully released deer, foxes they had rehabilitated, and even more bobcats, each one part of Lady's ever-growing network of helpers. "Dr. Chen!" Sarah called out. "You need to see this!" The veterinarian hurried from the treatment center, tablet ready to document. What they were witnessing was unprecedented, a gathering of released animals, all returning to the sanctuary. Not for help, but almost as if for a reunion. "Some of these animals were released months ago," Dr. Chen noted, checking their tracking data. "They're all doing well in the wild. They're choosing to come back." Lady sat beneath the new sign, watching as her assembled family of rescued and rehabilitated animals moved comfortably around the sanctuary grounds. There was no fear, no tension, just a remarkable sense of belonging. "She's showing us what's possible," Sarah realized, "that it's not just about rescuing and releasing. It's about creating a place where the wild and domestic can coexist." The original kittens approached Sarah, rubbing against her legs, just as they had when they were tiny. They had grown into beautiful adults, becoming ambassadors between the wild and domestic worlds. They were equally comfortable with the sanctuary's human staff and their wild visitors. Emma's camera captured the extraordinary scene. "Our followers aren't going to believe this, all these animals coming back together." "They'll believe it," Sarah said softly. "They've watched every step of this journey, from that first morning with Lady and the kittens, to now." She gestured at the thriving sanctuary around them. The property had transformed completely. The old dairy barn was now a state-of-the-art wildlife hospital. The fields housed carefully designed rehabilitation enclosures. The farmhouse had become an education center where visitors could learn about wildlife rescue and the remarkable partnership between humans and animals. Lady rose and approached Sarah, moving with the same deliberate grace she had shown that first morning. Behind her, her assembled family of rescued animals watched, each one a testament to the bridge she had helped build between their worlds. "You knew, didn't you?" Sarah said quietly to Lady. "You knew this place could be something more. You just needed to show us how." The bobcat blinked slowly, then turned to survey her domain. Under her guidance, the sanctuary had become more than just a rehabilitation center. It was a place where barriers between species fell away, where ancient instincts of fear and distrust were replaced by something revolutionary: cooperation. One by one, the animals began to disperse, back to their wild homes, their established territories, their chosen paths. But they left something behind, proof that what had started here could grow, could spread, could change how humans and animals interacted across the world. The original kittens stayed, taking up their usual spots around the sanctuary. They had chosen to remain as permanent residents, bridging the gap between domestic and wild, just as Lady had taught them. Sarah looked at the new sign again, remembering all the steps that had led to this moment. The first morning with the kittens, the storm that had tested their resolve, the mountain lion that had proved their capabilities, and now this incredible reunion that showed just how far they had come. "Home," she said softly, watching Lady guide her latest group of trainees toward the rehabilitation area. "You've made it home for all of us." Sarah's new journal lay open on her desk, its pages filled with observations and plans for the sanctuary's future. Through her office window, she could see Lady training another group of bobcats, teaching them the careful art of rescue and rehabilitation that had become her legacy. 2 years had passed since that first morning when a bobcat dragged a bag of kittens across her field. Now, as Sarah wrote in her journal, she could hardly believe how much had changed. Latest count, she wrote, 37 active Bobcat rescuers across 6 states, 212 successful rehabilitations this year alone, 15 new sanctuaries adopting our methods. She paused, smiling as she added, Lady approved 4 new trainees this morning. A gentle tap at her door announced Emma's arrival. The teenager, now the sanctuary's official media coordinator, had grown alongside their mission. You're going to want to see this, Emma said, setting her tablet on Sarah's desk. Remember that dingo sanctuary in Australia we helped set up? They just documented their first independent rescue. The dingoes are starting to bring them injured animals. Sarah studied the footage, recognizing the same careful, intentional movements she'd first seen in Lady. The pattern was repeating itself across the world, proving that what they'd discovered wasn't just a local miracle. It was a door opening to a new kind of relationship between humans and wildlife. Outside, the sanctuary hummed with activity. Dr. Chen led a group of veterinary students on their rounds. Patricia, now their full-time director of rehabilitation, supervised a new release. The original kittens, permanent residents and ambassadors, helped socialize newly arrived rescues. Lady appeared at the window, as she had so many times before. But today, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood another bobcat, older, graying around, the muzzle moving with careful steps. It can't be, Sarah breathed, recognizing the markings from Patricia's old photos. It was one of Lady's original teachers from the Blue River Center, coming to see what their star pupil had created. Sarah opened her journal again, needing to capture this moment. Today, the circle completed itself. What Lady learned at Blue River, she has taught to others. What started as one bobcat's mission to help has grown into a movement that's changing how we think about wildlife rescue. She looked out at her transformed farm, no longer a place of endings, as it had seemed after Tom's death, but a place of new beginnings. Every animal that arrived here, every successful rehabilitation, every release back to the wild, was part of a story larger than herself. Tom would have loved this, she wrote. He always said this land had a greater purpose. He just couldn't have imagined what that purpose would be. None of us could have imagined that our greatest teacher would be a bobcat who refused to believe that wild and domestic had to remain separate worlds. Lady and her old mentor moved off together, making their rounds of the sanctuary. Behind them followed the next generation of rescuers, learning the ways of healing, of helping, of bridging the gap between worlds. Sarah closed her journal, adding it to the shelf where she kept all their records. The story of how one act of trust had grown into something that touched lives across continents. Outside her window, the sanctuary sign caught the afternoon. Light, Thompson Wildlife Haven, where hope finds a home. And in that moment, Sarah knew that this wasn't just the end of one story. It was the beginning of countless others. Every animal that found healing here, every bobcat that learned to help, every sanctuary that adopted their methods was writing their own chapter in a larger tale of hope and transformation. Lady had shown them the way. Now it was up to all of and them, human and animal alike, to continue the journey she had started that misty morning on a struggling dairy farm, when she decided to trust a farmer with a bag of kittens and a vision of what could be.